Hi folks, John Dunn here, RPG freelancer, publisher behind Melior Via. I am up here at Immortals Inc. tonight with Mikey.
What is going on, John? It is the holiday season, and what do we have here tonight?
Well, we have the merriest of all things, and that is the post-World War III game setting.
How merry and
After
jolly.
all the bombs drop, that's the setting we'll be talking about today.
Holly jolly.
You got it. This game originally came out in 1990. Right, which meant it was coming out of the 80s. We've got a newer edition of it now. And I was a child of the 80s. So I remember regularly watching the news and going, so is this going to be the event that causes the bombs to drop? Yeah. So
the mystical 80s.
Yeah. So this game was very much on point then. And the game that we're talking about is Twilight 2000. And specifically, we are talking about the Twilight 2000 4th edition box set that's published by Free League Publishing. You know, this is the third-ish box set we've talked about. It's kind of weird. There aren't that many box sets coming out anymore.
Yeah, and they're a bang for your buck.
They are. So originally, like I said, this came out in 1990. Frank Chadwick was the original designer on it then. The lead developer on this version is Tomas Harenstam, who I believe is part of Free League Publishing. And when the original came out, actually it was 84. I lied.
Ooh.
84 was the first edition. 90 was the second edition. Then there was a 2.2 in 93. In 2008, somebody did a third edition, which they called Twilight 2013. And then this one kickstarted in August of 2020. Raised about $500,000 in the Kickstarter in Swedish kroner. And it's the fourth edition. Kind of ignores the third edition and really kind of gets back to the basics. The original one was published by Games Designers Workshop, which does not have anything to do with Games Workshop. Let me tell you, in the 80s, that was real confusing if you were into role-playing games.
Games Workshop, no, Games Designers Workshop.
Exactly, yeah. Games Workshop, of course, is out of the UK. Games Designers Workshop was an American company. GDW was also the company responsible for Traveller. I don't know if we've talked about Traveller before.
I don't think so.
It's a kind of one of the foremost science fiction, space fantasy type RPGs.
Might have to add to the list.
Yeah, we probably should talk about it at some point. We do have a couple of Traveller books on the shelf here, getting back to, what Immortals Inc. has. They also published a really fun horror cyberpunk game called Dark Conspiracy. They did a game based off of a comic book and eventual cartoon series called Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, and a few other things. Dangerous Journeys, which was like Gygax's big project after he wasn't with TSR anymore. This one, Twilight 2000, originally used their house system, which was a rules set that was mostly D10 based and had that classic Traveller feel that your character generation kind of laid out a life path for you, and your characters could die during character generation. Yeah. I always thought it was an interesting one because when you were creating your character, you particularly for Twilight 2000, you had to decide how long they'd been in the service, and the longer they were in, the better their skills could get. But if they were in too long, then their attributes started to drop. So there was a bit of a compromise in that system. When this originally came out, it was really relevant because it was kind of common thought that there might be a nuclear war and a nuclear winter, and then thered be a war afterwards, and nobody knew how that would go. This one is kind of a throwback. So it's actually set in the nuclear war that never was. So it's set after a World War III that happened in the early 90s. There's some alternate history that launches in there with the Russian government being overthrown after the Soviet Union collapsed and, well, things got sticky, right? It's a rather dark setting. NATO and the Soviet Union, after that rebirth, do go to war. There's a combination nuclear and conventional exchange.
Ooh.
Yeah, so the world gets pretty thoroughly trashed. Europe has just massive death from the cold and the famine and the fighting. Maybe a lot like what Ukraine is like right now.
Yeah.
Not a good time.
No.
And this iteration of the game, this box set focuses in very closely on Poland and Sweden, where there is active fighting taking place between the surviving NATO and Soviet forces.
Just zombies fighting each other at that point. Almost.
Well, not really zombies, right? These are actual trained soldiers. So the concept is you are playing a trained soldier who has, gone through their training and probably been separated from their unit. There have been massive casualties at this point. You probably don't have good communications with command. You don't really have a whole lot of supply lines, so you're kind of scavenging for yourselves while still continuing this war.
I feel like after all the war, angst, anxiety, depression, you are a zombie.
Well, you're certainly suffering from some issues, no question about it. So this is a box set, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. There are some intro briefings to pass out to the characters. There are a couple of, there's one very large double-sided poster map here.
Whoa.
Yeah, there's a whole lot going on with this map. There are a lot of smaller maps, some that are fold-out double-sideds, and some that are reversible, just single cardstock types. There's some blank character sheets. There's a whole bunch of chits in here that can be punched out for when you're moving around on those maps. Again, those are also double-sided. And then there's a deck of cards, and I think these have multiple purposes. You can see this one says initiative on this side. This side says encounters. And I think some of those also, I haven't bothered to pop that part open. But I think those also may have some reference cards in there for some of the various weapons. And then you get a bag of dice. And this does use a variant of Free League Publishing's house system. I think we talked about that when we talked about Alien.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
Yeah, so it's a very similar system. That one just uses 6s. This one does use 8s and 10s and 12s as well. There's 2 books in here. There's the referee's manual, which runs 112 pages. Oop, threw the box on the floor. And then there's also the player's manual that's a little thicker at 152 pages.
I like the coloring.
Take you through these real quick. The referee's manual starts off with a history of the world, basically that USSR counter-revolution. Then there's a section on GM advice. Mostly of that's focused on the tone of the setting, this post-apocalyptic world where war is still going on. Then a section of random encounters, an order of battle for the various forces that are still around. Factions and the forces is what they call that. A bit on scenario sites, which are just kind of different locations, kind of sandboxes for the players to interact with, along with a decent array of NPCs for each of those locations. Then there's an appendix for solo play. So if this is a world that you want to really experience on your own, there is a system for you doing that by yourself, going through these maps and having your unit of PCs that you can play around with. And then a second appendix, which offers conversion notes from the first and second editions. Notably, there were a lot of products put out for those, and a lot of products with a lot of different equipment, including, military vehicles and armaments of the period. A lot of people really got into the game based on that, and this does give you the opportunity to go back and find those books and use them with this material. The player's manual starts off with an introduction, then walks you through character creation. Attributes are die-based, and characters have an archetype and a nationality. Then they have skills and specialties, and you get into the game system, which, like I mentioned, is kind of just a variant of the Free League house system. Next chapter is combat and damage. It's very much map-based. You're going to be using those maps that are included along with the chits to indicate where characters are. This is a military combat game. It is appropriately detailed to reflect that. There are crit charts, there are rules for chemical and nuclear warfare, and there are vehicle rules that are really integrated into the system. The longest chapter of that book, I mentioned it's 152 pages. There is a 45-page chapter just dedicated to weapons, vehicles, and gear, because that's what a lot of the fan base for this game is really about. Going, what weapons can I use? What vehicles can I use? What armor can I use? Well, that's presented here. And then the last bit in that player's manual is the travel section, and again, map-based, which is why you're getting all these maps in the book. This is a full colors package. It is a box set from Free League Publishing, and it is $50. We got copies here on the shelf at Immortals Inc., and it's available through the website at immortalsinc.com.
Bundles on bundles on bundles. Well said, my friend.
Till next time, good gaming, folks.
Bye.